Hello, everyone, and welcome to Month of Romance, LGBTQ Romance with Elia Winters and Phillip William Stover. I'm Allison Carvalho, the events manager for Barbara's Bookstores. Barbara's has been a Chicago institution since 1963, and we are incredibly excited to be bringing you this virtual event. We are a family-owned and operated bookstore, and we pride ourselves on creating community spaces within our stores, as well as out of them, like these events. Before we get on to the discussion, I want to give you a quick tour of Crowdcast for those who haven't been here before. Firstly, we are still new to virtual events, believe it or not. We've been hosting these since June, but we are still figuring things out, and there's always new technology to be dealing with. So please be patient with us in case there are any technical issues. We will get things up and running as quickly as we possibly can. Also, please make sure to chat with other book lovers in the chat off to your right. We'll also be providing links with more information, with book recommendations, other events we have coming up, things like that. So please make sure to keep an eye out for that. If you happen to notice that your video is freezing or lagging, please use the little gear that you'll see at the bottom of your right-hand corner and change your HD setting to 360. We have noticed that that tends to help with any lag that you might experience. The last 10 to 15 minutes of the event or so will be open for questions. So if you happen to have a question that you want to ask these amazing authors, please put it in the Ask a Question function at the bottom of the screen. Also, if you maybe don't want to ask a question, but you want to see what other people are going to ask, go ahead and look at that option, and then you can actually upvote questions, and they will move up in the queue. So it's a great way to participate and know what other people want to ask for the event. And make sure that you check out the little green button at the bottom of the screen. That will take you directly to the event page on our website for this event, where you will see little icons that say buy the book here, and that is where you can purchase today's books. We are offering a 10% off discount for anyone who purchases a book today. You can click on that little green button down there in order to access it, and then you can use the code EVENTS at checkout to be able to redeem that 10% off discount. Lastly, I just want to make sure that we all know that this is designed to be a fun, awesome, wonderful event. So please make sure to be as respectful and kind to your fellow book lovers as you possibly can in the chat as well as throughout the event. Alrighty, I think that's everything. I'm very excited to bring our moderator to the screen. Jeff Adams is the co-host of the Big Gay Fiction podcast, creating a podcast for avid readers and passionate fans of gay romance fiction. Each week they bring you exclusive author interviews, book recommendations, and explore the latest in gay pop culture. He's also an author, having written stories since middle school. He writes both gay romance as well as LGBTQ young adult fiction, usually with a hockey player at the center of the story. I'd like to bring to the screen Jeff Adams.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me here and hosting this wonderful event for us.
Of course, thank you so much for being here. We're so excited to be hosting this with you as well as with the other authors. I'm going to go ahead and take myself off a screen so we can get the real stars of the show up. See y'all in the chat.
All right, I am so excited to be talking to these two authors today. They've written two of my very favorite books that I've read this summer. First, I want to introduce Elia Winters. She is a RITA Award-winning author. In her own words, she is fat, tattooed, polyamorous bisexual who loves petting cats and fighting the patriarchy. She holds a master's degree in English literature and teaches at a small rural high school where she also runs the drama club. In her spare time, she is equally likely to be found playing tabletop games, kneading bread, cross-stitching, or binge-watching Marie Kondo. She's also a sex educator and kink-positive feminist. She reviews sex toys, speaks at kink conventions, and writes geeky, kinky, cozy, erotic romance. She currently lives in Western Massachusetts with her loving husband and their weird pets. Welcome, Elia, to the screen. Hello.
Thanks so much for having me. Hi. It's great to be here.
And then I also have Phillip William Stover. Now, Phillip splits his time between Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and New York City. He has an MFA in writing and is a clinical professor at New York University, where he is the former chair of the writing curriculum. Phillip grew up tearing the covers off the romance novels he devoured so he wouldn't get teased at school. But now he enjoys traveling the world with his husband of over 20 years and sitting in front of the wood stove with their half-Basset, half-Shar-Pei rescue pup, and he would never consider defacing any of the books he loves. Thank goodness. That just hurts my heart ripping covers off books. Welcome, Phillip, to the screen.
Oh, there I am. Hello.
And here you are. Hello,
Hello.
Phillip.
Thank you.
So, as I said, I have adored both Hairpin Curves and the Hideaway Inn. And I want to start with Elia. Tell us all about Hairpin Curves and this wonderful story that you've written.
Sure, I've got it. Just show the book. So Hairpin Curves is, it's at its heart a road trip story. It's a second chance, frenemies to lovers, road trip romance. And the premise is that these two women used to be best friends, and they had a falling out over a misunderstanding at the end of high school. And now they've been invited to go to a former friend's wedding up in Quebec. She's moved away. She doesn't know they've had this falling out. So they are forced to sort of get back together to make this trip, and they're going to drive it. And so two people stuck in a car who have some latent feelings for each other. And we all know how it ends up from there.
And Phillip, the Hideaway Inn.
Oh, thanks. The Hideaway Inn is a summer romance, and it's about a guy named Vince who leaves the place where he grew up to reinvent himself as this alpha male. And he comes back to town, this river town, which is actually a real town in Pennsylvania called New Hope. And he buys this inn, hoping it will impress the farm boy who broke his heart, and hoping he will show him the big man he's become. And the farm boy is not impressed at all. It has gingham and lemonade and every cozy summer cliche you can think of. I try to jam in the book like a pot of jam.
And we'll stay with you, Phillip. What was your inspiration behind the Hideaway Inn?
The inspiration behind the book was actually, I've been writing a while, and I always wanted to write a book based on the lavenders, which are these windows in 19th century townhomes in Boston. When they were installed, they had an imperfection in them that turned the clear windows lavender. And people were very upset at first and thought these were an imperfection. And then later, they became a sign of beauty and something that was really sought after in the community. And I always thought about those windows, about something that is you think as a flaw, and then suddenly that flaw becomes something precious or something important to you. And this is a story about a character who thinks he has this flaw, which is he grows up gay and is teased for being effeminate, and he really tries to cover it up, and he tries to protect himself with that. And I wanted to write this book where he discovers that the thing he thought he had to cover up is the very thing he needs to access in order to have love in his life.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful. Oh my
Thank
gosh.
you.
I love
Thank
that.
you.
I've also never heard of these windows.
They're in Boston.
I'm from Massachusetts.
Oh, well, you get yourself over to Boston. And I think it's Beacon Hill. Is that a place in Boston?
That is a place in Boston.
I don't know Boston very well, except I know these windows. And I remember, that story and this was a very long time ago, so it had a profound effect, and they're quite beautiful if you see them.
Thanks.
We know where you're going is maybe your next road trip out, right? You're going to go find these windows. What was the inspiration for Hairpin Curves?
Well, I wanted to write a book that really pulled together a lot of my favorite tropes. And I love road trip stories and had never written one, but I'm just drawn to them. And I think part of that is because I grew up making road trips. My parents wouldn't fly, and we lived across the country from my family, Florida to Massachusetts. So we would make this road trip, like as far back as I can remember, once or twice a year. And it was just such a formative part of my youth. And when I got older, like I did start flying on my own, but keep coming back to the road trip as this like place that exists outside of everything else. Like the car becomes its own world. And I've road tripped with friends and I've road tripped with family. And I think it's sort of a magical space where anything can happen. And I thought that combining that with a road trip, with a romance, was a really fun idea. And so I got to do snowstorms and only one bed and all the things that I really enjoy, and forced proximity in this one book.
I like how you mentioned the forced proximity, because it wasn't just the occasional sharing of one bed. Of course, they're forced proximity because they are in this car for days as they go from Florida to Montreal. I mean, it was a huge road trip that then they zigzagged all over the place on. How
only
did you
2
decide?
hours. They're only allowed to go 2 hours.
2 hours out of the way.
That is the rule. I love a good rule.
How did you decide where to send them on this trip? Because it was not a straight shot up through North America as you might think it could be.
Yeah, so there were actually a lot of changes in that between my initial draft and between my outline and my draft. And so I thought about some of the places that I knew and really liked and tried to imagine in my character's mind, where would she want to go? So she'd want to see, because Megan has never been out of Florida. So she'd want to see New York City. She'd want to see Washington, D.C. She'd want to experience like those big places. But I wanted to also weave in like little things that she might have read about in a magazine or seen somewhere that just become representative of more than what they are, like seeing the sunrise on Tybee Island in Georgia. Like, it's not even that far away. I've actually never been there. I've been to almost most of the places on this list. But as I was like coming up with this whole roster, I started to think about places that could mean more than just the places that could have an impact on these characters. And some of my favorites. I did cut one, big one, originally, like one, if you've ever made this road trip, south of the border is this horrifying rest area. Not even, it's like this tourist area on the North Carolina, South Carolina border that became famous for these billboards that run the entire length of 2 states. But it's such a problematic place and complicated, and its relationship to race and history is really complex. And as I started writing it, I'm like, there's no way that these characters would know enough to do this justice. So I just cut it entirely. But that's a scene on the cutting room floor.
For a DVD extra one day or something.
Yeah, someday.
I'm curious. I think most road trip books usually start in the summer or the spring at least. You've done yours in the winter. And also it was a little different because most weddings typically are summer, but this was a winter wedding. What drove the winter aspect of it?
Well, I really wanted my characters to get snowed in. And and also I think that if you live in the South and you live in the South for a really long period of time, that's all you've ever lived. The idea of snow is much more magical than it actually is when you live there. And as someone who spent 11 years in Florida as a kid, I remember just how mythical it was. And I wanted a way to incorporate that. Plus all my experiences with Quebec, almost all of them are in the winter. So right what you know.
And Phillip, for you, as you said, this was a summertime story set in this really wonderful small town that is a real place. How did you decide to land Hideaway Inn where you did?
Well, it's the closest town to where our house is, so I picked it that way. But New Hope is a town I first came to when I was 12, when my parents didn't want to pay for summer camp, so they put me in the chorus of musicals, which I'm not saying made me gay, but I'm not saying it didn't, and I'm not saying it didn't help. So they would drop me off at the Bucks County Playhouse where I played a munchkin in The Wizard of Oz. And I remember it had a really like gay vibe to that city. And this was a while ago. And as I live in New York and we have a house in Bucks County and we had been going to New Hope, and I really wanted to write something about a small town because I had had an experience or an evolution as a gay person, where when I graduated high school and college, I thought I have to go to the city because that's what many people do when you're gay. You have to get out of where you are and go someplace new. And in the same way that Vince, this character, chooses masculinity, it's not so much of a choice sometimes. Sometimes it is the way of survival. So I wanted to rewrite that history a little bit and have this character look at small towns as an option and as a choice, and to be able to return to them as a place that is safe. Because they were never safe places for me growing up, even not just growing up, but with my husband traveling as two gay men, it's always, there's always a bit of danger involved in that. So I wanted to create a place that was entirely safe and what I like to think of as a new American tapestry. It is a tapestry of people of all sexual orientations, of all gender expressions, of all ethnicities, and lots of different experiences and ages of people. And I really wanted to create this very crazy quilt tapestry there.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me think of, I'm interrupting you. I'm going to keep doing it. It makes me think of like the way I love Schitt's Creek and the way so many people love Schitt's Creek is this sense of small town that is also loving and warm and safe, and how much safety matters, especially in romance, and the way we feel emotionally safe when we're reading it. And we need to feel like we're being taken care of and that the characters are going to be taken care of. And that's so important.
And the people who will get this reference will get it. I always loved Mankato, but I never thought I would be safe there. It's a Little House on the Prairie reference. I love that town, but I never thought I would be able to walk down the street there. So I wanted to create a Mankato where we could walk down the street. And it is based on this real place that is, nothing is as gay as the New Hope I have created. I don't know what happens to people when they go over the bridge of the Delaware River. Something happens and they get to New Hope and they are like, something happens to them. New Hope is very gay, but I've really kind of leaned into that part of it.
Yeah, and I like your Schitt's Creek reference too. We've just started watching that show. We're in season 5 right now, and I definitely see the connections with the kind of town Phillip has made, because nobody is homophobic there. They're just they're kooky, but they're not mean, and they're not that way. They're all very embracing and helpful of each other, and we all need that in society so much. It's interesting, these two books, the tropes are very similar almost across the board. It's a second chance. There's enemies or frenemies to lovers, if you will. Everything tracks back to high school. What is it about working in these tropes, these concepts, attracted both of you? And Phillip, we'll come back to you because we hide over last. Oh,
to me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, how can I say it? I mean, my most unrequited love was when I was 17. So I kept that burning all of these years. And that's when I think of romance. That's when I think of it happening. And one always wants to revisit those stories and sort of have a different ending than they had. My husband is safely tucked downstairs, by the way, so he will never hear this part of it. But, one wants to imagine what could have been in that. That was my inspiration of it. And also, I think there is such an impact on how we are treated in high school and as children in our romantic experiences, that the things that have really hurt us and damaged us then are the things that prevent us from loving now. I mean, I believe that just as an adult who doesn't write romance, as an adult in a relationship. So I really wanted to write a story about someone like this story has a relationship to the character's masculinity. And when you're teased for your masculinity, it has an impact on how you relate to other males and your relationship to masculinity. And I really wanted to start teasing that apart as being somewhat on the other side of it, although you never really get all the way on the other side of these issues, right?
Yeah.
And my people are older. Yours are so young. I was so jealous because they are about 10 years younger than mine and have their whole lives ahead of them.
I generally write characters who are older than these characters, and I think in some ways they also feel a little bit younger than they are. And part of that, I think, ties into the high school connection. I feel like sometimes if you're away from someone that you were really close with in high school, when you're back with them, there's almost a regression that happens, especially if, in the case of Megan and Scarlett, there's unfinished business. And so it's hard not to fall back on, when the hurt is never healed, the hurt becomes prominent again, and you become the person you were when that hurt first happened, if that makes sense. I also wanted to, both my characters are bisexual, and Scarlett has known it since she was very young, and Megan didn't know it until college. And so you have this situation where there's a little bit of, okay, realizing that we're both queer, but also how being at different stages of your sexual identity when you're last with someone, like how that can also play out in the patterns you set up and the way you rekindle your relationship. And so I thought that while I didn't want it to feel like super high school-y, that's where the root of the conflict started. And you've got to go back to that until you can move past that.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that these play more into LGBTQ stories a little bit? Because there's always that, as Phillip mentioned, the unrequitedness that happens in the past because we can't be ourselves, perhaps, when we're younger. I think that's changing for the generation today. But certainly I think when we all grew up.
I think for my generation, or for me, the balance between wanting to be loved and wanting to be safe is always a struggle when you grow up LGBTQ, that you want to be loved, but you also don't want to be beaten up. So you have to find a balance between these two things. One of my beta readers says, when I send her something, she's like, oh, your characters always want the same thing. They want to be safe. And I'm like, well, no kidding. They want to be safe because until you feel safe, you can't be loved, I think, right? I don't know. But that's kind of, I think they go hand in hand, if not anything else. So I think those are, and maybe they're unique to, maybe they're part of everyone's experience, but I definitely think they're part of the LGBTQ experience.
Yeah, I think it is interesting to think about how the people's relationship to their own identity has changed even so significantly in my own life. Like, I didn't come into an understanding of my own sexuality until fully adulthood. And part of that is just because as a bi person, I didn't know anybody else who was bi until college. I barely knew anyone who was out. And I have friends who are about 6 or 7. So I'm 39 and a half. No problem saying that. I have friends who are in their early 30s. I like the half because it's something you do as a kid. And I like to bring that back as an adult. 39 and a half, I'm almost 40. But I have friends who are 6, 7 years younger than me who had representation their whole lives. And just in that time period, and I think it also depends on where you grow up and what your family's like, and their relationship to being able to question, like having the opportunity to try to define themselves. They had more freedom in that, even in just 6, 7 years, than I did a little bit earlier. And so it makes me really excited for the people growing up today and how much more vocabulary they have and just how many more options they have to create different variations of their own stories.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One of the things that's always interesting in romance novels to me are the side characters. And it's interesting, Elia, that there are virtually no side characters in your book. Because it's the two on the road trip. There's a little bit up front as they're getting going, and then certainly once they're up in Montreal, there is, the wedding to attend. But other than that, it's a situation where they're interacting maybe along the way with an innkeeper or a store person or somebody, but it's them. How did that affect how you wrote, to be able to have them say everything they needed to say, but they couldn't call up the BFF and say, "Oh my God, this is happening"?
It was so hard. I've written, this is my 10th published book, and the first one where I have just these characters, and the patterns that I kept falling into, like that I go through with my other books, where I'm like, okay, this is like a good place for them to be like having a conversation with someone else and process. None of that. Can't have any of that. So I came from this last trilogy I put out last year, the Comes in Threes trilogy, is also all around this whole town and having this whole community. So to go from that to these two characters in the car felt like really some intense pandemic isolation vibes right there that I was not intending. And it affected how I like figuring out what they're going to talk about and when. I had a lot of great help with my editor, who's like, I think they've already covered this ground. Like, how can what's the next step for this? And because I often write out of order, it was a little bit of a mess in editing, but I'm really happy with how it ended up. Man, It was, side characters are great. You should have them.
Well, there was such an intimacy with the book. Like, I literally at times felt like I was just hanging out in the back seat as all this conversation kept happening, or I was, adjacent in their room or whatever, because it was that intimate. And I really found that to be very interesting, because you don't get that all the time, and especially through the whole book.
Thanks. That's good. I was hoping, like, I wanted that feel to it, but it's sometimes hard to know if you're just kind of screaming to get out of the car sometimes. And the ways that conversations like go forward and then back again when you're with someone for an extended period, you're like, all right, we're going to start at the familiar ground and then try out new things.
Mm-hmm. And then Phillip, your book is like a side character palooza almost, because as you said, you made like the gayest town possible. And I really love how you've got everything from a non-binary child to the bookstore owner to everybody in between. And it really gave Vince and Tack a lot of places they could go to have their, I have to talk to you about this, or at least pivot around the discussion. How did you decide your side characters? Because there's a lot there to choose from.
I came from writing middle grade and tween fiction. So in that, it's really important to create those experiences for children, because that's really where they're modeling and seeing those worlds. So I kind of carried that over. When I was a kid, I watched the PBS great performances of Our Town, with Charlotte Rae as the shopkeeper in the cemetery. Do you remember the scene? And all the people in the cemetery sit on the hillside, and they all sit in chairs. And each person from Our Town comes up and says something to Emily. I always loved that scene. And so I kind of recreated it on my own. It is this Our Town where everybody gets a little voice into it. And that carries over into book 2, where the town is like mild horror movie in terms of it begins to think on its own. So that happens in book 2. Like the town almost gets a consciousness and begins to work together to get this other couple together. So that's how that came up.
Ooh, I'm excited now for book 2. I was anyway, but now to have that little extra tease, it's like,
What was I you wrote middle grade and tween, and now you're doing romance. What was that transition like?
Oh, well, tweens and drama queens are not so different, my dear.
I teach high school.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the difference between that and like gay romance. For me, it's just that, the emotions are a little higher on which side, I don't know, but on one of them, I guess. I started writing women's fiction, so adult women, a little older than where my characters are now. So I've really run all over, but people are people. And all of my characters are the same in that they're all like kind of middle-aged divorcees from the Upper West Side. But then they're also tweens and they're also gay men. Like I have a voice and I kind of find a way to have that voice speak.
Yeah, it's an interesting trajectory. What was your trajectory into romance, Elia?
So I've been writing since I was a kid, and I wrote everything. I recently, somebody on Twitter was asking about like, what are the novels you haven't published? And so I'd never gone through and made a whole list by year. And it is like a wild ride from my Star Wars fan fiction in high school, full-length novels, to like romance, horror, YA, a lot of sci-fi, a lot of high fantasy. And I felt like I kept gravitating back to romance, that there were always romantic threads in my books. That was something that I really enjoyed writing. And I used to definitely just write standalone sex scenes as like a high schooler. I passed those suckers around in my Catholic school to all my friends. Very popular. Never got caught. Knock wood. I mean, I don't think they can get me now. And so for my 10th year of National Novel Writing Month in 2010, I decided I was going to write a novel that was just for me, that I wasn't going to try and publish or make marketable or anything, and wrote the novel that became purely professional, which was BDSM erotic romance. And after I finished it, I went, oh God, I wrote this novel just for me. But now, like, I think this is the best thing I've ever written so far. And then I had to figure out whether I wanted to write romance as a career and like stick to that genre, because at least while establishing myself, I thought that's what I would want to do. And then as I got into it, realized it just aligned so well with my feminism and my sex positivity that I just love being here. And I might write other genres as well, but I like staying in romance.
And how's romance for you, Phillip? I mean, you've had your other genres as well. Do you like staying here the best, or?
I've always had yes, absolutely. I've always had a romantic element in my fiction, I think. So, like you just said, like it's always been a part of sort of what happens. And I grew up, as you said in my bio, I grew up reading romance. That was always a big part of my life. It was something I was always, to be honest, I was ashamed of it. I thought it was something like the Lavenders. It was a weakness, I thought, growing up, but now it becomes a strength. But I didn't know that as a kid. So I tore the covers off. I had these elaborate rituals for purchasing romance where I would flip the books over when no one was looking so I could read the back covers. And then when I would purchase them, I would always say, oh, I think these are the ones my sister wanted, just to kind of create a decoy event for the romance. And I read heterosexual romance. Is that what you call it? That sounds odd, but yes, heterosexual romance, otherwise known as romance. I guess I don't know what that is, but I read heterosexual romance, and then I wrote heterosexual romance, and I didn't know there was gay romance. Like I don't know what I was doing. I was taking a nap when that was all rising up. I was doing something else. And then all of a sudden, my Amazon feed start popping, in gay romance. And I was like, oh, that's the book thing I want to write. I didn't know it was a thing. So that's how I landed there. And it feels great, and it feels weird because I never thought, that would be a thing I could do. But it was clearly what I always wanted to do. Like silhouette romances were like huge for me as a kid.
Mm-hmm. I used to sneak my mother's romance novels, and I got really good at like speed reading and skimming through them and like leaving them exactly where she had left them. And apparently somehow, like even when I started making it a career, she didn't realize that I had done that until I mentioned it in my RITA acceptance speech last year. And she called me the next day and said, I did not know you were sneaking my romances all those years ago. That just kills me.
Was it Judy Blume's, was it Wifey? Remember Wifey?
Oh my gosh.
Of course. Yeah, right. Yeah, that was a big one.
She was reading like some really high heat historicals back then. Like, wow, like really, really, really torrid stuff. I love it. It's what I cut my teeth on.
My mom too. My mom was a big reader. Our garage was converted to bookshelves with only books in them. And that was, so my mom had a big influence on me. And I always tell my students, she said, if you have a book, you're never bored and you're never lonely.
I love that.
Yeah. And I always, it's true. It's like, when you have a book, you're okay.
I love the idea of the entire garage as books.
Oh, it was only books in the garage and evening gowns, but that's a different story.
We'll talk about that some other time.
Yeah, sorry.
And Phillip, you mentioned this, that the rise of gay romance has kind of come up, particularly in like the last 10 to 15 years. And even in the 5 years we've been doing the podcast, I mean, there's just more and more and more and more. We're seeing, imprints like Karina create Adores, which both of your books are part of. And it's really incredible to see this continued growth in the marketplace. How do you two feel as now being part of that and being inside the Adores line and getting these books out? I mean, I've seen pictures of both of your books out in the wild in like Barnes and Nobles, which is amazing. How does that feel for you two?
Oh God, it's freaking awesome. Oh my gosh. I've been publishing since a while. This is my 10th published book, and I have never been able to go into a Barnes & Noble and sign one before. I've been all digital first lines and traditionally published, but traditionally published in lines that weren't going to print runs. But even separately from that, when I was first writing, nobody was acquiring FF that I knew of. And so I've written all different combinations, and I still love doing that. And I'll still, I'm going to write, my next series is FF, but I'm interested in writing everything. But to have like a major line prioritizing it and putting it in bookstores is so exciting. And I hope the start of even better things to come.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's been confusing for me because when I wrote Tween, I wrote under PG Kane. I go by PG. And those books are girl power books. They are pink as pink can be, but also strong. There's one series is about a girl scientist. The other series is about girls in commercials. Like, they're really girl books. So I remember when I was getting a new agent and we had emailed each other and they invited me to lunch. And of course they thought I was female. And when I showed up, it was a big surprise to them. And when I would do book signings at schools, I would go and they'd be like, what's going on? This is very strange. To them, it wasn't to me. I mean, I just wrote the books. And now I write romance, and I'm, that has flipped because romance is written a lot by women. So now I'm writing in my own voice, but I'm still on the other side of the equation in being that minority voice. So I don't know how I have to get it right somehow. And I haven't found it yet. I don't know where I belong. I've got to
belong right here.
I don't know.
So, Phillip, you mentioned that Hideaway is part of a series and that the second book is coming. What can you tease out more about the series and anything you could tell us about when that second book's going to land in our hot hands?
That book comes out at the end of January, and it's called The Beautiful Things Shop. And it is about an antique store in New Hope. And it's mentioned in the first book, and there's a character from it there. Two new owners come into that shop. One is a fine arts collector of 19th century antiques who has a degree from UPenn and collects armature and fountain pens and Victorian fans. And the other is a guy who collects Muppet lunchboxes and Scooby-Doo mugs and mid-century stuff. And it's about a clash of aesthetics and a clash of wills. And there is actually two buildings in New Hope, a mid-century bank and a 19th century house that are right next to each other, and they're about to be destroyed in the community because they share a support wall. And it's about how the community comes together to both save their relationships and just to help them create a relationship and save these two incredibly different buildings.
That's awesome.
It has everything. I have dueling Etsy stores that will go live in January because I have my own Etsy store, of course. And all of the things in the book are in my Etsy store. Now, you would think that was brilliant marketing, but I assure you it's a lack of creativity, because I would think like, oh, what could they use? And I'd look at my shelf and I'd be like, oh, my hamburger Crocs. Yeah, those are good. And I would write it. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute. So all genius comes after the fact. I cannot take credit for it, but it's a lack of creativity that created that.
One of my favorite things to do on vacation that I miss because we're in the pandemic times. My best friend and I, she got me started on this. When we go into antique shops, we look for the old postcards and go through and read people's postcards. And they are sometimes really boring, but often hilarious. Like, you have 3 lines to write. What is it that you're going to say? And just people writing like really formal passive aggressive letters to the other person about not having written, and you like these little hints, and it'll be something like, and John got the flu, and like just throwing all this out. But I love the treasures that you can find in cool places like that. Do you like go into shops and go looking at cool stuff? And
that is the thing I miss most during the pandemic. I mean, I am a bargain hunter, and I specialize in women's vintage handkerchiefs. That will surprise no one who's been listening closely. And at one garage sale before the pandemic, there was this woman, and I saw a big basket of them. And I was like, oh, basket of vintage. And this woman came up and said, I used to buy these all over the place, and now I can't find them anywhere. And I thought, that's because I'm buying them all. So yes, I have a competitive aspect to it. As you can tell, I love old things. My husband would live in a stainless steel sink if he could, and wash it out at the end of the day. So his aesthetic is completely the opposite of mine. I'd live in cabbage rose. I want cabbage roses everywhere. So the basis of this book comes out of a dueling aesthetic that can sometimes happen in relationships.
I kind of feel like this handkerchief thing is your villain origin story. I'm just saying that I'm just expecting that down the road.
Do not come between me and a vintage handkerchief. It will get ugly.
We have all been warned.
Yeah, we've been warned.
Elia, you mentioned that you're now working on an FF series. Hairpin, of course, is a standalone. But what can you tell us about the series?
So it is very early in the idea stage. Well, I guess it's firmly rooted in the ideas and research stage. This series is World War II FF historical romance. So I am writing about women, specifically WACs, in the Signal Corps. So the first book is a pigeoneer and a telegraph operator. And then I'm also interested in writing cryptographers, possibly mechanics. I haven't figured out, like, I've got the blurb and the whole setup for book 1. And now I'm just so deep in research. That's all I've been reading to really understand not only as much as I can, the experience of women, but also the experience of queer women and the jobs that they would be doing at this time and what that looks like on a day-to-day basis. Because I feel a great responsibility to get it right and to do right by these stories. So once I finally get these blurbs put together, we'll be pitching it and see who's interested. And I have no timeline. I have just hopes and lots of research pages about pigeons.
Pigeons.
Pigeons?
And the pigeoneers, of course. I can't wait. Looking so forward to that. I can't imagine the both the depth of the research and how fun that research might be too, to look back at that time with those women.
Yeah.
You had me a telephone operator. I think of Ernestine kind of plugging and unplugging.
So just a reminder to everybody to please ask questions. The Ask a Question button is down there, hanging out in the corner. We do have one that I'll give to you guys. We've talked about the pandemic a little bit. Of course, we're all sitting in the middle of that. What's it been like to write and be creative at this time and keep moving forward on your projects?
I mean, for me, it's been often I have a book in my head or a creative project in my head, and I don't know what happens to it, but I go to teach, or I go to the gym, or I go out to the store or whatever, and it goes somewhere else. I have to say now, for me, it's always there. So it's like I have a different type of access to it. So that's what it's like for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's been interesting. I feel like a lot, especially at the beginning, just operating my day-to-day life took a lot more emotional labor than I'm used to. And I was like, my first draft deadline for Hairpin Curves was March 31st. So I was doing a significant amount of the writing in the first weeks of the pandemic. And it felt really strange to be writing about these characters going into restaurants and staying in hotels and just, breathing around people irresponsibly. And now that I had to recreate routines and allow that structure in order to be creative. And as a teacher, just teaching remotely and how much extra time and effort that took. And I'm going into that again this week. But I feel like I've been able to keep writing and creating by just being a lot more diligent with my emotional health otherwise, because it's so easy to just fall into the pit of despair and not understand why you can't produce anything creative.
And you go to sleep and you were writing a contemporary, and then you wake up and it's a historical.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It's just suddenly it seems so antiquated, and you wonder, is that what we'll be doing? I mean, I just have sort of moved ahead with it because that's what I did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Delorianne has a great question that I think I like it a lot. I wish I'd thought of it. It's a two-parter that we'll start with. Which of your characters would you get along with the best?
Okay.
The wheels are turning.
So Megan and Scarlett, I'm going to hold this up again because I just love this cover so much. It's so cute. Megan and Scarlett each have some of the best and worst aspects of my personality. I think that's pretty common when we write. We take little bits of ourselves and then build totally different aspects of ourselves. I think that I would get along better with Megan than with Scarlett, because I think Scarlett's outward confidence and boisterousness, especially if I knew them when I was in high school, I think that would have been really intimidating for me. Nowadays, I think I don't know, I think it probably is the same. I think I'd still be intimidated by that level of outward confidence.
And Phillip?
The restaurant manager in the Hideaway Inn is named Anita, and she is an incredibly snarky, tells it like it is person, and the only person who can kind of see through Vince right away and kind of yell at him. In the original version of it, she was at like a 15, and I had to bring her down to like a 3.
Wow.
Which is probably shows you where I am. Probably like it's because I'm so that way. So I brought her down way down, and she is based on dear friend of mine and me. So it would definitely be her, because she is she's kind of a pain in the ass. And that's how I think of myself.
And you can maybe imagine the flip side to this question. Which of your characters would you butt heads with?
Gosh, I think they'd both drive me crazy at certain points. I think I'd be telling Scarlett to just tell the truth for once and just own up to your mistakes. And I would be trying to drag Megan to do new adventures. I think the things that frustrate them are just the things that each character finds frustrating in the other are things that I also find frustrating in both of them.
For me, I think I would say Anita, the manager of the Hideaway Inn, because she's incredibly difficult. And that's, it's difficult. People are difficult. I know from experience.
I'm not sure if I think it's cheating that you picked the same character for the question.
And therein, that's what makes me difficult.
I now want just like the whole world according to Anita, just like this, just her running narrative of everything.
Anita should have her own podcast. That's what it is. So she could just have her opinions put out there on a routine basis. Another question we have is, what would be another genre that you would want to write in with queer main characters?
This is easy for me because it's actually what I'm writing in there. It's not a thing, but I don't know. That's what I want to write. I want to write women's fiction with gay people. What is that called? I don't know. I mean, we know of women's fiction as a genre. It is often a story that has a romantic element, but it's really more about self-discovery in that genre. So I want to write women's fiction without women. Is that possible? I don't know. I mean, not that I don't want there to be women in it, but I can't find a name for it. So when I describe it to people, that's how I describe it. It doesn't make any sense. But imagine, if you will, your favorite chick lit books with gay people as the protagonists.
I love reading YA, but have not written YA. And I think as much as my agent would love that, I think she would probably tear her hair out at the branding that would need to happen to keep my YA readers from just stumbling into a whole kink trove of erotic romance. They may be reading it anyway, but I'm not endorsing that at all. But I love the rise of, it's not even the rise. There have been gay characters and queer characters in YA, but to not have it be tragedy anymore, to not have the story be about outing or discovering your sexual identity or your gender identity, yes, let's more of that where characters just happen to be gay and go on adventures and do all the awesome things that happen in YA.
Yeah, I'm totally behind that entire push in YA. It's just wonderful to see the characters just be, where it's like the least interesting thing about them. So if anybody wants to throw out another question, we've got a little more time. And as we get close to wrapping up, my whole podcast is about book recommendations. So what have you guys read this summer that you want everybody listening, that as they go pick up your book from Barbara's bookstore, that they're going to go get something else too?
Okay, this question's really hard for me because I'll pass it over to you in just a second. You can share more, because the only things I've been reading lately have been research books. My TBR though is really beautiful. I really I love historicals. I have all my articulate qualities are just gone. I did a whole binge read through the winter, and I just loved The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics. I got The Care and Feeding of Waspish Widows, which I'm really excited about reading. And I loved, I also read Fire on the Ice, which is a previous one by Tamsin Parker that was just super fun. So those are some FF delights that I'm enjoying. But if you want to read some intense nonfiction, I just finished Coming Out Under Fire, which is the history of gay men and women in World War II by Alan Barabee. And that was just amazing. He also has a documentary. So that's just some fantastic research reading and just interesting history that doesn't get talked about a lot.
When I used to get this question, I used to lie because I wanted to sound more interesting than I am. And I've decided that I'm not more interesting than I am. I'm just going to tell you the truth. And you're going to have to listen to it or accept it. So I finished Danielle Steele's Beecham Hall. I've always read Danielle Steele's novels, and that woman never disappoints me. It's just long. It just goes on and on and on and on. I just love it. And I just read Robin Carr's The Country Guest House, which is so sweet, and boy, does she know how to make super sweet characters that are great. And I think she has a Netflix series, which I didn't know until I started the book. And I listened to Hairpin Curves, which I loved, and I want to do a unsolicited plug for this by saying it is the type of book that you slide into very easily. It's just sort of like, it's like a comfortable piece of clothing you put on. It is the type of book where you're in it and you're so much further in it than you think you are because it's so comfortable to get to. It has this great beginning, this great setup, but it's not like one of those setups where it's like, okay, we know what's going to it's like you really kind of have to play through each of the parts of it. And it's just such a lovely book. And I should say, I listened to it. Your narrator is great. I love her.
She is awesome.
She's really did a wonderful job with it. And I love, I want another one in Florida because I did like the diner and all of that. But I just think it's a wonderful book about, really setting up these events and really having the relationship work through. So that's my unsolicited plug. We have not met before this podcast.
We haven't.
We never speak to each other again after it.
We better. I'm really enjoying this. I'm so excited about just this whole series that you're putting out and just this town and New Hope. And I love it. And I love safe places and rich tapestries of people. I think that's
tapestries. It's like a Carole King record.
I want to quickly ask about the audio too, because you've both got audio for your books. What was it like hearing your characters come to life in these cases?
It's always a little weird. I got to be honest, because it's like my words, but it's not my voice. And it was really exciting. I got to be part of like having a hand in picking the person, which I've never gotten to do before. And so hearing different people, and then I was like, oh yeah, that's the one. It becomes so much more real when it's in someone else's voice.
I was excited for me because I said to my husband, that means at least one person is going to read this book. So I was thrilled for that. It meant at least, now he might not have taken it in, might have got it in, but at least one person read it from start to finish, I'm guaranteed. So I was thrilled.
I love
Nice. That's awesome.
You never know,
A friend of mine is, I'm good friends with Felicia Davin, who wrote Thorn Fruit, and she has the Nowhere series. And we used to do writing sessions all the time back when that was something you could do. And she records her own audiobooks in this studio. And that sounds like the most traumatic thing. I mean, maybe someday with a lot more ego and maybe some booze, but she just like boldly goes and records these. And she's like, yeah, so I have my sound mechanic sitting there listening to me read this incredibly detailed sex scene. God bless.
Even doing the podcast every week and talking, I would never, ever want to record my own audiobook. That's a next level sort of situation there. God bless the people that do it, but not for me.
And they're so good at it.
Yeah. we're lucky, I think, especially in gay romance, and even the FF I've read too, that there are so many wonderful narrators that just breathe life into these characters. That it's really wonderful that for people who want to read in that way, that they get that kind of richness instead of what we had in the audiobook days, like 15 years ago or so, where it was just a very straight read of the book. It's so wonderful now. So what's one last opportunity for you both to pitch your book to these audiences, to get them to go pick it up, to click the button that's under this video right now and pick it up before we wrap this up?
I am desperate for approval. So if that in any way influences you to read it and say something nice about it online, you have no idea how happy it makes me. So I am not afraid to plead to that. That said, I think if you are looking for books that have, stories about gay lives and the way being gay influences lives, that's the type of book I write. I also, something that we both share is I think we both write really cozy books. Like your book is so cozy. As cozy as is it a Corolla? What do they drive in? It's not a Toyota Corolla. It's a
no, it's a Camry Solara.
A Camry Solara. Yeah, I mean as cozy as a Solara can be. But it's incredibly cozy, and that's what I write to. The Beautiful Things shop has ice skating and sleds and cookies and hot chocolate and a Potbelly stove and all of those things that draw me into books and make them feel like a nice hug. And though I don't come across as a nice hug, I think the books perhaps are.
You do come across as a nice
well, that's
hug.
very nice. Thank you. Put that online. That would make me feel so good.
You can use that as a pull quote for me.
Okay.
Like a nice hug.
Yes, thank you. That's good. I feel so good now. So that's good.
So these are dark times, and I think it's important to read and watch things that make you feel good. They make you feel like the world can be a beautiful place and things can turn out well. And I wanted to create that and maintain that in Hairpin Curves. I wanted to do cozy. I wanted this to feel like the road trip that we aren't taking right now, to see new places and to watch these characters just grow and come to love each other and admit that to themselves. I think the sex is really hot. So that's a plus as well. I really pride myself on writing hot sex. And I think that Hairpin Curves is like, it's got its angsty moments, but it's not a dark book. And I think dark books have their place, and I love them at times. But I want you to read Hairpin Curves, but I want you to read it and feel like it's going to take care of you, and these characters are going to have their happy ending.
Yeah, I think you've both summed up the books wonderfully well. I will say that, both of these sit not just within my favorite books of the summer, but also like of the year so far too. They both are so full of happy and hope, and can chase, as you said, the dark times away that we're in, and let us go somewhere in these times where you really can't go anywhere. We can go to this wonderful town and take this wonderful trip, and from the coziness of our own home. And they're just so nice. This is what I love about gay romance, are these kinds of low angst, very cozy, happy books. There's definitely a place for the angst and a place for those more tense books, but these hit my happy place. So I am so happy we got to talk about these, because they are so delightful. Where can people keep up with you online? Because that's something we should tell people as well. I'll let you go first, Elia.
Okay, great. We just stare at each other intensely. All right, so I am on, my main website is eliawinters.com. And I'm on Twitter pathologically. It's just at Elia Winters. I'm also on Instagram, Elia Winters author. I do dip my toes into the evil waters of Facebook. You can find me there for Elia Winters, but probably the best place to keep up with me is on Twitter.
I don't like to brag about my social media presence, but just recently I passed 100 followers. So, that's pretty big. I have no followers. 100, and most of them are like Russian bots, which is fine. That's fine. But you can find me on Twitter. No one else has, but you might find me there. I'm on Instagram a lot, and I do take nice pictures of our dog. And we have an incredibly cute dog, and we live near a state park, so I take some okay pictures. So you can find me on Instagram, and I'm also at my website and email. So yeah, but I am on Twitter and Instagram by myself.
Fantastic. And I do love the pictures of your garden and the park and things like that. I'm like, I want to go there. Tired of my environments. I want to go there. So thank you both so much. This has been so much fun and a great way to spend a Saturday afternoon. And thanks to the folks who came and hung out with us as well.
We can't see you, but thank you so much for watching and listening.
Yes. And thanks for moderating, and thank you, Barbara's Bookstore.
Thank you, Jeff.
I like how the book just...
Of course, thank you all so much for being here. This was such a wonderful talk. I feel like I haven't laughed like that in so long. This has just been delightful. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Jeff, for being here. Thank you, of course, Phillip and Elia. Please remember, everyone, to click on that green button so that you can purchase your copy of the books that are featured today. As I said, if you click on it, it takes you to our website, and then you scroll a little bit and you'll see buy books here, and you can click right there. And then don't forget to get your 10% off by coming to the event today by using the code word event at checkout. We hope to see you again at one of our wonderful events. This month we are celebrating National Romance Month. This is the first of our 2 events. Our next one features author David Levithan, who's talking about his short story collection, 19 Love Songs. He's an incredible author. We're so pumped to be talking to him. Also, don't forget to check out our other events, such as our new inclusive book club called Culture Exposure, where we are discussing books written by authors representing a wide range of marginalized communities. Our first one is happening next Wednesday, August 26th at 6 p.m. and it features the short story collection Octavia's Brood, Short Stories from Social Justice Movements. It's an incredible book. We cannot wait to talk about it, so please make sure to join us. And thank you all again for being here. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a wonderful evening and happy reading.